Welcome back to PC Builder. I'm Jason. This is our April 2025 Q&A, and we got some great questions for this one, including NVIDIA. Are they losing market share to AMD? The data will surprise you. We'll also talk about 16 gigabytes versus 12 gigabyte GPUs, especially with the launch of the 5060 Ti 16 gigabyte. Should you get that, or should you get a higher end GPU with less VRAM? And of course, we'll answer all of your PC building questions, including how much thermal paste do you need to use, and should you upgrade from a 7800X3D to a 9800X3D. If you get value out of this video, please give it a like. It makes a huge difference to the channel, and subscribe for more cool PC content. Let's jump into it. This video is sponsored by VIP SCD Key. Say goodbye to crazy expensive Windows licenses and that terrible Activate Windows watermark. Right now, use the links in the video description, head over to VIP SCD Key and get a Windows 10 or 11 OEM license for a great price. Pick your product license, then use the PC Builder discount code PC25 for an additional 30% off. Go to the activation settings on your PC, put in the code, and boom! Windows is fully licensed for a crazy low price. And they have Microsoft Office licenses too. Use the links in the video description. All right, let's start off with Mormon Dude. I know this is theoretically possible, but do you think there's any realistic chance that NVIDIA's current practices with the consumer GPU market will cause them to actually lose market share? Or do you think they have too much of a hold on public consciousness and the pre-built market for that to realistically happen? We'll talk more about why the pre-built market is actually really, really important in just a second. But yes, in fact, I do think they're going to suffer a big drop in market share, and you don't even have to take my word for it. You can already look at the actual data. Let's in fact go through some data real quick on this. Let me pull up. This is John Petty Research here. They basically do a lot of research into the various semiconductor manufacturing, including the discrete desktop GPU market. So these are actually discrete desktop GPUs. They're not laptop GPUs, they're just desktop, because that's primarily what we're looking at here. And let's just take a look at the amount of percent market share. As you can see, NVIDIA has been essentially dominant in this space, at least since 2020. Right, even in 2019, around the launch of the 5700 XT, AMD still had about 30-ish% market share in terms of shipped GPUs out there. Now, some of this data gets a little weird because we did have the big cryptocurrency mining thing, and NVIDIA just went all in with that. So some of these numbers in terms of shipped GPUs, maybe not as reliable in terms of how many gaming GPUs are actually out there being used right now. We'll take a look at the Steam hardware survey in just a second, which does show very similar things. But you can see within the last quarter here to quarter 4, 2024, now that only goes up to the end of 2024, but it does take into account the holiday shopping season and others. AMD 17% went up 7%, and Intel went up 1%. Remember, they did launch their Intel Arc B580 GPUs just before the end of 2024. Meanwhile, NVIDIA took a pretty steep dive there, down 8%. So up 8%, 7% went to AMD, 1% went to Intel, while NVIDIA was down. But you don't even have to look at this. There's other metrics as well. One of those is the Steam hardware survey. I know people absolutely love this one. Pretty dramatic drop. I do want to caution, there is just, because it's a survey, there's some natural variability to this. I don't know if that's kind of combining to make it look even bigger, or it could be that it's even bigger than what we're seeing and we're just not seeing it because there is some volatility. But if you take a look, NVIDIA had 83% of the Steam hardware survey. So anybody who's logged into Steam playing a game, right, and who has checked the box that they, yes, please, you can survey my hardware for the Steam hardware survey. 83% NVIDIA GPUs, this was in February. And then we looked at AMD, 11.5%. And then Intel, of course, I would say most of the Intel stuff, 5.2%, that's integrated graphics. Remember, a lot of people are playing on older laptops or laptops that don't really have any kind of huge graphical capabilities, and they're using integrated graphics. Look at this, check this out. AMD goes up from 11.5% to 16.9% in a month. So this is March 2025. Meanwhile, NVIDIA falls from 83% to 75%. Intel also ticks up a couple percent here to 7.7%. So that's a pretty huge uptick. And a lot of that obviously is going to do not just with GPUs that get sold into custom built systems or DIY PC systems, but also it's going to have to do with systems that are pre-built out there. And this is one of the things that I think people don't really realize. NVIDIA has had an absolute lock on the pre-built gaming PC market, except for the shortages that we experienced during the GPU mining days where, yes, they were putting AMD GPUs into those systems, and AMD has been trying to break into or maintain some kind of foothold, not just into desktop discrete GPUs, but also into laptop discrete GPUs. They've largely been unsuccessful. I've talked to a couple of pre-built makers or system integrators out there. They basically tell me, look, we'd love to use AMD GPUs. We can probably get them for a little bit cheaper out there. We can probably sell the system for a little bit cheaper for the performance. But our core audience, generally, they're looking for the green sticker on it that says NVIDIA. If it's got the green sticker, it's so much easier for us to sell. And look, we're not going to go fight the current. We want to move our product. We want to sell our product. We cover the pre-built gaming PC market. I can tell you, there have been years, including before the 9070 XT launched, where despite the fact that AMD had a pretty robust lineup, including the RX 7000 series, and at the high end, the 7900 XTX, it was almost impossible after the launch of these cards, maybe a month or two afterwards, to find them any longer in the pre-built gaming PC market. AMD had shipped a certain amount. Maybe their partners were obligated to use a certain amount because they also use the Ryzen CPUs, obviously. And then that was pretty much it. It was very difficult to find AMD GPUs after that, and everything was NVIDIA. So this Steam hardware survey, taking down that much, I think a lot of the negativity that we're getting right now with the drivers in particular, people had massive driver problems with RTX 50 series. We got the melting cables are back, and the fact that NVIDIA is just not shipping many GPUs into the gaming market because they want to shuffle everything into data center AI right now, which is where they're making massive amounts of money. And if you look at their financials, they're basically making 95% of their revenue outside of gaming. That's insane. Just even 5 or 6 years ago, that number would have been flipped upside down. Gaming would have been most of the revenue. Gaming is basically now a rounding error on their overall profits. And NVIDIA just released their earnings or their guidance recently, and they say there's no slowdown in the growth of AI. So that gaming number, while it's remaining relatively flat right now, the AI number continues to increase. And at some point, you got to ask, is NVIDIA even going to continue to make gaming GPUs? I'm not saying that they're going to stop, but if you're running a business and like 95% of your profits are coming from this totally other thing, at what point do you decide gaming GPUs or this other little segment over here is just a distraction and you'd rather put those resources over here where you can make so much more money? So I begin to question things like that. Meanwhile, on the AMD side, check this out. AMD CEO Dr. Lisa Su says the Radeon RX 9070 series GPUs 10 times higher in its first week than its predecessor, which was the RX 7000 series out there. That is absolutely insane. And obviously the 6000 series and everything else out there. Totally insane. It just makes you think that maybe AMD has really caught fire, NVIDIA has stumbled enough, and maybe this is their Ryzen moment. Remember, they went through a huge period where their CPUs, their bulldozer CPUs, were just total garbage. And then they launched Ryzen, and still it looked like Intel was pretty much unbeatable. They were just going to be kind of bargain basement, but they went all in on Ryzen, and it won basically. Their chiplet design won. This could be another kind of Ryzen moment for them for Radeon, which I think will end up being a good thing for gamers. Chris wants to know, would it be better long-term to get the RTX 5070 over the 5060 Ti 16 gigabytes? Would the 12 gigabytes of VRAM on the 5070 be such a huge issue in the future that it wouldn't be worth the extra money over the 5060 Ti 16 gigabyte? Well, right now it's hard to get either GPU. I actually ended up buying a 5060 Ti at launch, and I had to spend $529 for it, which was a little expensive given that it's supposed to be an MSRP $429 card. Now, I did later in the week a couple of closer to $499 cards drop, but the 5070 right now you can pick up for $610. So the gap is actually not that big, although we do expect in the coming weeks, if fingers crossed with all the nonsense that's going on in the world right now, that if things go normally, and that's a big asterisk right now, that we will get more 5070 and 5060 Ti supply, and that GPU prices are going to start coming down as we actually get some quantities of GPUs on store shelves. But let's talk about the difference in 12 versus 16 gigabytes, because this will become kind of a real thing. I went and looked at the 16 game average that TechSpot did, which is basically hardware unboxed, right? This is their average at 1440p. Let's focus in at 1440p. Even at 4K, I'm not seeing that big of a difference in the numbers, but if you look at, this is their 5060 Ti 16 gigabyte review. I'll leave it linked down in the video description. Let's look at the 16 game average here. you can see the 5060 Ti, it's basically what, 76 average FPS at 1440p versus the 5070 99. So it's basically about 30% faster. The 5070 is about 30% faster, a little bit more than that. But if you look, where does that VRAM difference actually come into play? Well, really the only place right now is ray tracing. So let's look at some ray tracing titles. Starting off with one where clearly there is a difference between 16 and 12 gigabytes here. That's Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. This is a title that absolutely hammers GPUs when you turn on the full ray tracing, right? You turn on ray tracing with all the kind of bells and whistles on it, which is what they've done. We can get into whether or not ray tracing is something you even want to worry about. It's almost 8 years now. There's only a handful of titles where it's actually transformative. That's according to Hardware Unboxes, massive survey that they did of all these games. I personally feel like ray tracing is a kind of a failure in terms of it's extraordinarily niche. It's not something I would buy a GPU over, but if you're wondering the differences between 12 and 16 gigabytes, so if we zoom in here so we can actually see these numbers, yeah, look at that. The 5060 Ti actually runs the game, 29 average FPS. You can decide it's basically a console-like experience versus the 5070, which is basically just doesn't really run the game at 13 average FPS, even though the 5070 was 30% faster in our previous example when you look at all games out there. Now, I will say, if you look at 4K, obviously none of these cards can really run this at 4K, but the 5060 Ti actually puts up a fight out there before it dies, but most of these GPUs they can't do it. The 5070 runs out of VRAM, basically. Here's where the rubber hits the road in terms of, does this matter now? Because Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, if you look at some of these other ray tracing games, even Dying Light at 4K, the 5060 Ti, it closes the gap a little bit with cards like maybe the 4070 out there, but not really with the 5070 in that same way. So we can look at, there's Dying Light 2, here's Black Myth Wukong. This is really kind of a NVIDIA sandbox title. I like to say there's a lot of NVIDIA kind of features in here, including ray tracing and everything. So 17 average FPS, not a great thing at 4K. The 5070 though, it does fine at 25 average FPS, fine being relatively unplayable. But if you look at 1440p, where it probably is playable, right? The 5070 gets 46 average FPS, the 5060 Ti. So really not any big difference there. So I still think we're at an early stage where you ask yourself, the Indiana Jones game with ray tracing, is that the canary in the coal mine that's like, oh no, you should really be looking out for how much this is going to start hammering you in the future, kind of like thinking about future proofing versus what kind of performance you're getting today. I don't think we're at a point right now that you absolutely need 16 gigs of VRAM for 1440p. There are some titles at 4K where, yeah, especially when you're turning on some level of upscaling that uses extra VRAM, turning on ray tracing that uses VRAM, that this might hammer it a little bit more. But right now it does appear that 12 gigabytes is kind of holding strong for 1440p. All right, Anton DK, channel member, by the way, you can become one too. We do live stream builds, all kinds of cool stuff. Check out that join button down there. We have a members Discord as well. Since the announcement of the 5060 series, it's been clear NVIDIA is trying to bury the 5060 Ti 8 gigabyte behind an embargo schedule, yeah, by letting reviews on the 16 gigabyte go earlier. Do you think the media is doing a good enough job trying to expose what NVIDIA is trying to do there? I think in this particular case, they did a bang up job on this, but I want to first talk about the fact that NVIDIA is releasing an 8 gigabyte GPU in this class for almost $400. Almost $400. What is going on? What's the MSRP? It's about $380 in 2025. That is insane. To me, there should be no 8 gigabyte GPU, certainly above $250. I'd say $200, but $250 would be like my max, absolute max that I would not put you on total blast. $400 or $380, whatever it's going to be, probably $400 once you get all the AIB markups and stuff. Unbelievable. The other thing is there's no difference between the two versions except one has the memory clamshelled onto it to have 16 gigabytes. Why do they even need to produce a single 8 gigabyte version? I just don't understand, because there's not that much of a cost difference between the two. It can't possibly be that they need another product within like a $50 delta there. It blows my mind that they would even put something like that out. And to me, it shows that NVIDIA's focus is really not on gaming GPUs, unfortunately, right now. It's on AI. If they were entirely focused on gaming GPUs, And I think number one, we would have seen a huge VRAM increase across the board, but we would definitely not have seen any 8 GB GPUs launch at $400 because they're just basically making the same mistake that they made with the 4060 Ti. Now remember, the 4060 Ti 8 GB, there were really no plans for a 16 GB version of that card until the outcry happened, and then they launched a 16 GB version of that card. So they knew going into this one that they were going to have a 16 GB version. Why even make an 8 GB version? It just blows my mind. If AMD does the same thing with a 9060 XT at these same prices, I will also blast them, by the way. I have heard that the pricing on the 9060 XT is going to be significantly cheaper. The card's not quite as fast as the 5060 Ti, just slightly slower. I'm hearing rumors than the 7700 XT. Those rumors are primarily from like Moore's Law is Dead. You can check out his recent video on the 9060 XT launch. If they release an 8 GB version of that anywhere over $250, to me, dead on arrival, I will put them on blast for that. I will absolutely put them on blast. I want to see 12 gigs or more. 10 is okay on like the B570. That card is back for $279. That's to me like on the edge of acceptable, under $300, 10 GB right now. You can feel the walls closing in if you have 10 gigs of VRAM. And I think in a year or two, you're gonna definitely feel those walls close in. And here's the thing, the 3080 folks have had those cards for about 4 years now. So they've gotten 4 years out of it. The people who are buying 10 gig cards right now, even 8 or 10 gig cards right now, how many years are they gonna get out of their GPU? I don't think the value proposition is the same at all because it's 4 or 5 years later. So I just think releasing these cards now is just yuck. That being said, I think the tech media did an absolutely bang up job exposing how NVIDIA was trying to get away with putting out an 8 GB version by only launching the 16 GB version first. I think Linus did a whole video just on that. They even canceled their review and just did the video on that. Hardware Unboxed did a great job. Not only did they clearly specify that in their review of the 16 GB model, that there was an 8 gig and there was going to be a big difference between the two, they went out and did a whole expose when they were able to pick one up. So 2 thumbs up. I thought the tech media did a really good job. Nathan Johnson asked, do you think it's worth it to upgrade from the 7800X3 to the 9800X3? Or would you spend that money elsewhere? Well, honestly, if you already have a 7800X3D system built, I would not then go get a 9800X3D unless you had like an RTX 5090. Then obviously you got the fastest GPU, might as well get the fastest CPU too, because the 7800X3D is very fast. And I will say, it looks like the 7800X3D is finally back in significant quantities. You can pick it up. I just saw it at Walmart. We posted it for like $387. That's the lowest it's been in a long time. And right now, for whatever reason, the 9800X3D seems to be low quantity again. It seems to be selling out everywhere, and you can only buy it for more than MSRP right now. So fingers crossed that's coming back. I know we're in a crazy period right now with shipping and everything, and international trade wars and all that. But the 7800X3D coming in at that price, if it holds that price, even goes down a little bit. Remember, you could buy that thing for like $330 not that long ago. And then a lot of people are like, oh no, I want to wait for the 9800X3D. And then they end up spending almost $500. And that's if you could get it, because it was sold out largely until January. So if that 7800X3D is down closer to $380, it's a great pickup. And I honestly would probably grab that unless you have a super high-end GPU and you don't have anywhere else to spend your money. So if you have a 5080 and obviously you can't quite get to a 5090 or something like that, and you got an extra $100, it makes sense to go from a 7800X3D to a 9800X3D. But this is kind of like the best CPU GPU combo thing. So check out our best CPU GPU combo 2025 video. We go kind of through the economics of how this works. All right, Deepak Thomas wants to know, should they buy a 7600X or 9600X for a gaming PC? Well, honestly, the 9600X has been super cheap lately and has been coming with Monster Hunter Wilds. So if you at all interested in that game, I'd pick up the 9600X. There has been a deal on it, Newegg, for a 1TB SSD, an NVMe SSD, with a 7600X for about $200. So you can just decide which one, because the 7600 and 7600X do not come with a game. If you can pick up the game bundle, the 9600X is kind of like buying a 7700X basically in terms of gaming performance. So it does make sense if it's only like 20 or 30 bucks more, especially if you want the game, you basically come out ahead. I Love PC Sim Racing asks, what's the best value for the money mid-range GPU right now? That's a tough one. It depends on what you define by mid-range. I am seeing now the Arc B580 coming back into stock for around $330. Yes, I know that's inflated over its MSRP or what its MSRP is supposed to be, but we're in an inflated market right now, and that's not going to change until we get more supply in the market. I'm also seeing the Arc B570 10GB GPU out there for like $279. So 2 thumbs up. I'll leave them linked down in the video description. Check them out. I think those would be pretty good. Those are obviously more on the budget end. The mid-range is tough until we get the 9060 XT, which we're expecting at Computex. AMD's already said that they're going to make a big announcement that includes gaming and Radeon at Computex. It's going to be May 21st. So I would expect that's when we're going to see the 9060 XT launch. But right now, other than that, I do like the 5060 Ti 16GB if you can pick one up at MSRP. Adrian Yeager asks, when buying my PC parts, do I need to buy my own thermal paste, or is that included with the parts? Should I get my own anyway? Check out our best cooler guide. Generally, almost always, you will get enough thermal paste for at least one application, sometimes two, in a lot of coolers. I especially like id cooling for this. You usually get a nice little tube of thermal paste. It's typically enough for like 2 applications out there. If you got value out of this video, please give it a like. It makes a huge difference to the channel. And of course, subscribe for more cool PC content. What kind of PC content did you check out? Our best CPU cooler 2025. We went through everything that you need to know, including how much thermal paste do you need to get? Do you need a CPU contact frame? And what's the proper cooling for your CPU? Check it out, and we'll catch you on the next one.